Invitation, and thank you very much for the introduction. Actually, as it has been explained, I'm coming to this topic from the Asian expertise, and more particularly the China expertise. The reason I got involved into researching on CPEC was the researches we conduct, generally speaking, about the BRI. And I would say that as a research center focused on Asia, it's no surprise if I tell you that probably 50 or 60% of our research is related to China per se. And in the recent years, since 2015-16, and especially 2017, with a very large BRI forum in China on the 20th of May 2017, we have paid a lot of attention at looking how the BRI project has an impact on the region. That led me to go to Pakistan twice in the last, I would say, 30 months. I covered I would say the usual areas which people in my position would cover. So I went, of course, to Islamabad, I went to Lahore and Karachi, and I had the opportunity, first of all, to be introduced by the French embassy to academics there and some entrepreneurs who are involved in a CPEC. Viewed from the Chinese point of view, which is my entry point to this issue, I would probably split the Chinese approach to Pakistan as a whole. Before we speak about CPEC, I would split it into three different sequences, probably. Of course, we know the very famous expression by China that Pakistan is an all-weather friend, but once we said that, you have to remember that China is not able to list many countries in the same category. It's very important to understand that China's approach to international relations is that China does not have allies. China is not in the center of an alliance web. It's really practicing international relations, be it in the region or worldwide, in its own way, which means that you don't have the equivalent of a NATO or whatever around China. So when China can leverage on a relation like Pakistan, we have to pay a lot of attention to it, because you don't have many relations like the one that China entertains with Pakistan. The relation, of course, is based on several aspects, as most of you know, but I would say that one of the big drivers for China to leverage on this relation with Pakistan is, of course, the very important and strategic contradiction for China with India. China, we all know, is a rising power now, but it's a rising power in its own way, very different from the previous rising powers, because it doesn't state its own goals. It is mostly entangled in land area. It's very difficult for China to secure seaways outside of China Sea, be it East China Sea or South China Sea, and it views itself as a landlocked power. And China is not very much secured about its own strength and influence. For that reason, but also for other reasons, Pakistan is key in China's strategic view, because one is the very natural counterpower to the big challenger to China, which is India. I remind you that India will be more populated than China in the coming 20 to 25 years, going beyond 1.4 billion people. That India, with all its weaknesses, has a much easier access to the Indian Ocean, and the Indian Ocean, by many geopoliticians, is defined as the most strategic ocean in the world. Atlantic Ocean is not a strategic ocean, because both sides of the Atlantic, basically, you have countries and powers which are on the same political and geopolitical side. Pacific Ocean is not totally a strategic ocean for the same reasons, except, of course, if China involves too much in Southern Pacific, whereas Indian Ocean, as we just saw, because of the traffic related to hydrocarbons, of course, but also because of the fact that you have key nations bordering this ocean is key. So for China, having access to Indian Ocean and having that access through Pakistan is absolutely key. So that's probably the basis of the interest by China towards Pakistan. I said three sequences. First of all, you have the first sequence, which is that in spite of the strategic importance of Pakistan, the instability of Pakistan until recent years raised ambiguous feelings and ambiguous attitudes by China towards Pakistan. So China wants to be present in Pakistan, of course, but until 2015, until the real signing of the MOU about CPEC, China had mixed feelings when it could look at the instability of some region in Pakistan. Then the second sequence, of course, after the MOU, is coming also for the fact that China has, for reasons which probably go beyond China's but also relate to the situation in the region, China involved in what we call the AFPAC issues, and China got more and more involved in peacekeeping operations in Afghanistan, and at one point of time was probably dreaming of being a kind of peace broker, or at least stability broker in Afghanistan. But that period did not really end up with an involvement of China into the peace issues in the region, but rather triggered the interest for the CPEC. And this is where CPEC really took off, with the announcement, subsequent announcement of first 45 billion equivalent US dollars for the first stage, which was described, and now we probably are reaching 60 billion. I remind you that the announcement of the BRI, it was called OBOR, One Belt, One Road at the time, was 2013. It was announced for the land Silk Road in 2013 in Kazakhstan, in Almaty, and for the sea routes, it was announced in Indonesia the same year by Xi Jinping, last part of 2013. So Pakistan came in quite early in the process, even before the 2017 Global Summit. So second sequence, China got very much interested in Pakistan, and the projects were developing quite importantly, with the description which was made that basically it's a China-centered project, that it, of course, is quite beneficial for China, there is no question, probably for a portion of the Pakistan entrepreneurs who benefit openly or less openly from the tenders related to BRI, but it has been said very clearly, the burden is mostly on Pakistan shoulders, because the workforce comes from China, but the funding has to be made by Pakistan. I don't know whether it was mentioned by the the order keeping along the project is also the responsibility of Pakistan, and as was said, in spite of this burden which weighs on Pakistan's shoulders, Gwadar harbor is almost closed to any Pakistan watch or even third parties watch. Is basically a Chinese enclave. So that's second sequence. During the last 6 to 9 months, though, we have to take into consideration two facts. One, which is, of course, domestic in Pakistan, which we all know, which is the change of government. The fact that not only did we have a change of government, but on top of that, we also have IMF getting back into the picture in Pakistan. I remind you that Pakistan is one of the countries which has the longest frequentation and habit of dealing with IMF, because there had been several situations whereby Pakistan needed support from IMF, so that's one. Just after Prime Minister Imran Khan came into power, discussions with IMF started about the foreign reserve situation of Pakistan, which are now down to less than 10 billion US dollars, which is very, very little, of course, and this is related to the increase in commodities which are imported by Pakistan. The trade is, of course, in a very bad situation, as you know. So that's one. But second reason for this third sequence, which is not, I would say, in favor of China showing its strength in Pakistan, is coming from factors other than pure Pakistani factors. China has experienced more and more resentment about its BRI project in several countries. First was Malaysia. Malaysia also had a change in government. Mahathir, 93 years old, came back to power, and the first thing that Mahathir did when he was elected was to go to Beijing and reneged on almost all the projects which were related to BRI. The second issue that China is facing is, of course, the repossession of a big infrastructure projects in Sri Lanka, which happened in 2017, whereby they had to repossess 90% of the assets of a harbor infrastructure which they built in the south of Sri Lanka. So they have now to administrate it. And the fact that in Pakistan people are more and more aware of the risk that whenever the burden is too heavy for one country to carry, well, you may end up with a BRI being only a way for China to repossess assets. You call that the way you want, colonization, or seizure, whatever. So China has adopted a much lower profile. This is why in the recent months, on top of the infrastructure projects which are included in CPEC, you now have some funds which are supposed to be allocated to humanitarian projects, education projects, whereby China is saying, yes, CPEC is about connecting China with Indian Ocean, thanks to roads, pipelines, railways, so on and so forth, but also, well, raise the standard of living in Pakistan, and not only the standard of living, but also the standard of education, and will be almost or marginally an aid program. Whether this is paying lip service, whether this announces China pulling back marginally from its ambitions in Pakistan, I would say the jury is still out. But the main point is that among the various BRI projects, which sometimes are quoted as high as 700 billion or 1,000 billion US dollars, Pakistan, with the 60 billion US dollars CPEC project, is the one which is the most serious, the one which is the most advanced, and the most critical, probably, for China. So you also have to remember that many observers, and I belong to them, are also viewing the CPEC as a test project for China to succeed in BRI or fail in BRI. There are lots of questions about BRI succeeding or not. BRI is less and less put forward by the Chinese authorities as of now because of the slowdown in the Chinese economy, because of the trade disputes with US, and China is by far not as flamboyant as it used to be throughout 2018. Is it a durable turnaround? Is it just a temporary turnaround? That I don't know, but maybe the message to Pakistan is that there is room probably to influence the direction of Chinese action. In Pakistan, there is more room to negotiate with Chinese industries, corporations, authorities. It's always very difficult to negotiate. We all know that. But if there is room to negotiate, it's now, as opposed to what used to be the case 6 months or 1 year ago, and we will see what the future brings.
I would just like to take from what Dr. Jean Francois was just saying with regards to when it comes to the projects of China in other areas, and sort of see, because we've seen that Africa was one part where China was criticized a lot in the past with regards to sort of neo-colonialism, as it has been referred to. So if you would like to shed some light on the issue of how does Europe look at China's expansion and Mr. Olivier?
Well,